Hello, everyone, and welcome to the monthly meeting of the Arkansas Society of Freethinkers. I'm Bern Bradley, and I'm one of the organizers of the Freethinkers. We are a nonprofit organization devoted to maintaining the separation between religion and government, advocating a scientific and humanistic viewpoint, and improving human society. Find out more about us on the web at arfreethinkers.org. Or, and this is the most reliable way, by getting to know the members and organizers by coming to our events. Our calendar's on meetup.com. Just search for Arkansas Society of Freethinkers. With that, I'm going to do the thought of the day. I saw John Lewis about a year before he died, and what was remarkable to me about him is he was nearly beaten to death just because he was advocating for the right for all citizens to be able to vote. He was not advocating for anything terribly radical. He just wanted everyone to be able to vote and was nearly beaten to death on the Pettus Bridge. But in his later years, he got tired of people saying nothing had changed. And so he gave what I've chosen as the free thought of the day. Sometimes I hear people saying nothing has changed. Come walk in my shoes. He said that as a member of the leadership of the United States House of Representatives. Here with this month's member story is Jerry Schultze.
Thank you. Oh gosh, I just realized I'm not going to be able to see the slides, which ones are up, so we'll just have to hope for the best. This was the most fun I've ever had as a member of this group. That was on September 19th, Talk Like a Pirate Day, 2008. The Westboro Baptist Church was coming to town, and we did not like that. We thought that they should have an answer. So what we did, I hate to do this, I'll have to get over here and look. There we are.
I think we can hear you there.
Oh, you can hear me here? All right, well, let's do it. And I can look back at my notes. It was the holiest day in the Postarian calendar, September 19th, Talk Like a Pirate Day. The holiest day, except for, of course, every Friday. Every Friday's a holiday. And so what we did is we got the place opposite of the place that they had reserved for their protest. They were there to protest editorial writers. Apparently they were pro-gay or something. I don't remember. But anyway, when we first got there, we were there first, so we just had a bunch of regular Talk Like a Pirate Day things and signs, and we were dressed as pirates. And the whole idea kind of was at that point that we were just going to pretend that's what we were there for. We were there about that celebration. Some people thought we were Jimmy Buffett fans, they call parrot heads. But, and some of us probably were. But anyway, what we did is waited until they showed up, and then we switched signs. And we have Talk Like a Pirate today that God hates shrimp. And I don't know if you remember the Westboro Baptist Church. I'm sure everybody here does. They're a bunch of lunatics who thought God hated America and cursed America because we permitted people to be gay. And you know how terrible things were in America in the 2000s. I mean, unlike great places like Somalia and Eritrea. I mean, we were indeed cursed. But they said it was because of what we were doing. So, we changed before from Talk Like a Pirate today to God hates cotton polyester blends. Now, all of these things are, if you look through the same set of ridiculous rules in the early, in the Pentateuch or Torah or whatever you call it, the first 5 books of the Bible. There's also stuff about shrimp. There's also stuff about mixed fabrics. There's also stuff about not planting 2 types of plants in the same ground and, not seething a kid in its mother's milk. That must have been a real problem back then. But, so here they be, the scalawags, and we had confounded filthy young solid barnacle covered bills of sons of fish-bait mob of accursed lovers. So anyway, so much for that. And then it was just a lot of fun kind of taking all the attention from them. So one of the things we had in the assignment said editorial write about us instead. And go ahead to the next one. you can see here, you know, that I think we had a list there of things that God hated and, you know, all of the above. So the next thing that we did was, amazingly, we didn't know anybody else was going to show up, including this pirate over here. Another pirate showed up. I didn't know who he was, still really don't know who he is. He wasn't a member of our group, but he was certainly dressed for Talk Like a Pirate Day. And so he joined our protest. And then some students from one of the universities around here, colleges, joined our protest as well. We didn't even know they were there. And, you know, since we had been assigned various locations, the police always had to figure out what side people were on and send them to the right side. Wasn't terribly difficult this time, though. So, anyway, we got a bunch of great publicity out of it. The Arkansas Times, they said, the Cuckoo Phelps hate group walked the plank this morning after a happy bunch dressed like pirates and holding signs saying God hates shrimp, Leviticus, and God hates cotton polyester blends stood opposite them at the corner of Markham and Scott Streets. The group, made up of Central Arkansas pacifarians, waved swords and growled, "Arr!" in a manner that would have made Abby Hoffman proud. With cars honking and waving at the pirates and a TV crew giving them all the attention, the Phelps group, with child in tow, picked up their fag epithets and went away. Pitiful. Well, actually, I think we found out they booked several protests in Little Rock that day, and they had to spread themselves out. But it looked like we scared them off. Well, I don't think we did. But anyway, they were seeking publicity, and we were stealing it from them. It was fun. So the next slide, I guess, will show you. We got other publicity as well. You know, this was just from another web page that showed us and showed the publicity. And then Pirates Duel with Phelps Family was one of the headlines and one of the things. So I really, you know, I enjoyed that because that's pretty much what was going on. And in the Kansas City pitch, they wrote, "Pirates spread the message that God hates shrimp. The Pirates of Little Rock stole Fred Phelps' Westboro Baptist Church's thunder last Friday. The Topeka Church was protesting the National Conference of Editorial Writers because they are responsible for the satanic milieu in this evil land and for assisting the satanic agendas of baby killers and fags. But in a fortuitous twist, the protest happened to fall on International Talk Like a Pirate Day. They took our day, we're taking it back. How to make Fred Phelps disappear." So I guess go on to, and I say others got the idea. There was another protest very similar, not on Talk Like a Pirate Day, but I don't know if they had anything to do with ours or not. I don't know if they've ever heard of us, but I took credit for it anyway. And the next one is, just another, this was just a blog post, lest we forget the value of religion in society today. I would like to point out the stellar example of pastafarians in Arkansas. Truly the best possible response to the lunacy that is the Westboro Baptist Church. Brilliant, just brilliant. Thank you, Arkansas pastafarians. Now remember, September 19th, 2026 is another International Talk Like a Pirate Day, so start practicing. Anyway, best time I ever had in this whole group, and the thing about it is, protesting stuff like this, making a point like this, is very much dependent on the circumstances. You have to have the right circumstances show up. You have to react to the right circumstances and choose your battles wisely. And I think this was a battle that we chose very wisely. So that is my member story of the day. Thank you.
Here with this month's Skeptical Sidebar is Chris Borecki.
Thank you, Byron. I'm a little slow on the giddy up today. I don't know if anybody noticed, but it's cold outside. For show and tell today, I brought my little space heater that I use in my little workshop in the backyard. This thing uses 750 watts, and in about 2 hours it'll raise the temperature in my little workshop by about 4 degrees. So not a lot of power packing in this thing. It might make you a little more comfortable when you're in the bathroom or whatever, coming out of the shower. But I wanted to talk to you guys about something that I saw this fall all over the media. It seemed like there were these ads: heat your home with Bitcoin. You're going to heat your home with Bitcoin. You're going to run a Bitcoin miner in your house and utilize the waste heat to keep warm and to reduce your other utilities, right? Seems like a win-win. Seems like free heat. You get Bitcoin on the one hand, you heat your house on the other hand, it's like free money, right? Well, that's the pitch, basically. And so I wanted to kind of dig into this, and it's really hard because it's a lot of physics facts and things like that, and I'm not a scientist by any means. So the statement of the problem is it economically profitable to run a crypto mining machine in your home to generate usable waste heat while paying for itself, earning crypto? Okay, that's our question. The machine example I found is a fairly modern machine, an Antminer S21 Pro. This thing is probably about the size of one of those little office mini fridges that you might have under your desk or something. And it cost $3,300 to buy one of these. And very powerful computer. It was originally released in 2023. And I mean, they might have done a couple iterations, but that's about it. The website oneminers.com calculates that an S21 running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week will consume 2,537 kilowatt hours per month. So that alone is twice what my whole household consumed in December while running an electric heat pump to keep warm. So this one machine that you can buy, it's already, running by itself double the electricity load that my whole house pulls. So my cost of electricity in North Little Rock is some of the cheapest electricity in the country. We take this for granted, folks, that we have some of the cheapest electricity here in Arkansas anywhere, and that's probably why they're opening a Google data center in the Port of Little Rock and another one over in Conway, 300,000 square feet each. And so we're paying about 10.5 cents per kilowatt hour. And so I calculated that at that price, the Antminer S21 would cost $265.11 in electricity per month if allowed to run 24/7. So the question is, how much heat are you getting for that money that you're spending, and how many Bitcoin are you getting for that money that you're spending? OneMiners.com calculates the heat output of an S21 as 11,975 BTUs per hour. And a British thermal unit, basically, is what that is. It's the amount of energy required to raise a pound of water by 1 degree Fahrenheit. Pounds in Fahrenheit's really old school way of measuring things, but it's stuck. In the United States, we go even more backwards when we talk in terms of tonnage. How many tons is your HVAC unit? And that $11,975, it's pretty close to 1 ton. So if you know that your house has say a 3-ton unit or a 2.5-ton unit, that helps you understand how much heat this thing does. It's probably about a half to a third of what your whole house capacity is. So it should, create a decent amount of heat for your house. Stated another way, that's 3,510 watts, almost like about five of my little 750 watt space heaters is what this Antminer S21 generates in terms of heat. So let's talk about the plug that you would need. What would happen if you plugged in a device running on 3,510 watts of energy into your electrical outlet? Probably you would overheat some things, right? This 750 watt space heater is already pushing it in terms of what a lot of household wiring can handle. You can also get twice this size, 1,500, and they burn down houses on a regular basis. The fire department hates them. So yeah, let's talk about, you really don't just plug this into the wall like a space heater because it's way more power than you can handle on just a regular outlet. You're going to need these things, these Antminers come in 120 and 240 volt variants, and really you would want the 240 volt, and that means installing a new dedicated line in your house just to run this thing. Now keep in mind, this bit mining machine is going to have to be like in your living area. You can't put it out in the garage because then the heat would not be usable. You can't put it in the attic or out in the backyard. It has to be in your living area, or else the heat goes where you don't need it. So you're going to need a 240 volt dedicated line with a 20 amp breaker, and an electrician can install that for you. And I could tell you that that will cost about $1,000 because I recently had that work done. If your breaker box needs to be upgraded, if you don't already have a 200 amp breaker box on your house, if it's older, then expect to be more like $4,300 because that's what I paid a couple years ago. So yeah, that's if you're on a crawl space. If you're on a slab and they have to go through walls and stuff, you're getting up there in terms of the electrical cost to install this stuff. And so add that to the cost of your $3,300 Antminer S21. Let's talk about depreciation too. The depreciation on a computer is going to be pretty high, right? Like if you buy a laptop today for $1,500, what's it going to be worth in 2 years? Not $1,500. I wouldn't expect this, crypto miner to do much better, especially since you'll be buying it at retail and then trying to sell it to somebody on eBay or something, I guess, when you're done with it. So if you figure out that the machine costs $3,300 and it'll be obsolete in what, 3 or 4 years, you're looking at almost $1,000 a year in depreciation that you're going to pay in addition to that $265 a month in electricity bill. And then there's also a noise problem. So this Antminer S21 runs on, it runs about 75 decibels. And for comparison, that's kind of like having the vacuum cleaner running full-time, 24/7 in your house. So good luck sleeping with 75 decibels going on in your living space, right? You can't put this in a closet, the heat won't dissipate. You can't hide it away. It's got to be where you want the heat. And so you've got this vacuum cleaner sounding machine running 24/7 using $265 a month worth of electricity, and it's loud. You've also got an intermittency problem. So let's say you buy this heater, this Bitcoin mining heater, and what are you going to do the warm 6 months out of the year? Because if you try to run this thing against your air conditioning in the summertime, or even in the warmer days of spring or fall, you're going to just absolutely have an astronomical electric bill because your air conditioner's got to pull all that heat that you're putting into your house back out of your house. You're just moving it twice and paying out the nose. So when you think about how much Bitcoin you're going to earn, you got to factor in that this thing is going to be off at least half the year, probably more like 2/3 of the year here in Arkansas. So even though we've got cheap electricity, we don't need the heat very often. And then you've also got a latency problem, which is the big deal, right? Your home internet is not nearly as fast as a data center. I'll just tell you that right now. I looked it up on Xfinity. The most that they can sell me is 300 gigabytes per second. So 400 gigabytes per second is like the old data center standard, and we're moving up to terabytes per second pretty soon. And these data centers are wired directly into the fiber optics of the internet's backbone, right? They're not going through some proxy server with, Xfinity or AT&T or whoever, Verizon. They're going straight to the internet, so they're always going to be faster than you. So even if you have a really fast Bitcoin mining machine set up in your home, and I'm not saying you'll never get a Bitcoin, but I'm just saying that you're outgunned. You are way outgunned by the data centers, and the data centers are just getting bigger. And so the fastest internet that you can get at your house is going to be maybe half as fast as what your local data center can pull. And so yeah, the people selling these devices are not responsible for your financial outcomes. Keep in mind that earning cryptocurrency, it's like your computer has to be the first one to solve a very complex mathematical problem. If your computer is not the fastest and it doesn't have the fastest connection, it's not going to be the first one. So I'm not saying that you'll never ever mine a Bitcoin, but I'm just saying that you're really, really already going into this at a disadvantage because of your home internet. You're also vulnerable to your home electricity costs because, as I mentioned, all these data centers are getting built. Power plants are not getting built as fast as data centers, which means the price of power in the next few years is likely to go way up. So as you're setting up your house to be heated in the most inefficient way possible through resistance heating, basically like my space heater here, you're becoming more and more dependent on the price of electricity to run things. And as the price of electricity goes up, your price of running this amp meter coming up. So, what's my conclusion? My conclusion is that probably buyer needs to beware. There's a lot of factors that you have to pull together, in terms of cryptocurrency knowledge, computing, electricity economics. You've got to pull all these different sources of information together to analyze this problem, and that makes it too difficult of a problem for most people to analyze. I think it's unlikely, that it's going to be unlikely that you will ever make a profit using this thing. And in fact, the New York Times did a write-up on a smaller version of this that was only $900 that you could just plug right in. And they said that it costs 67 cents of electricity to earn 12 cents worth of Bitcoin. So again, they're not really responsible for your outcomes here. They're not doing the math for you. They're just saying it makes heat and it earns Bitcoin, and the math about whether that's a good deal or not is up to you. But in the meantime, there are dozens of businesses selling these things to people who, I'm just going to go out and take a guess and say your average person has not done the math or the analysis on it. So that's my free thought of the day: buyer beware. And just because other people are doing it doesn't mean that you should do it too, just like Mom said about jumping off bridges. Thank you, everyone, and back to you, Bern.
My notes are gone. I took them with me to the back. We'd like for you to volunteer for a role. Talk to us if you'd like to deliver the free thought of the day, skeptical sidebar, or share a member story. You have something to share, and we want to hear from you. As you've noticed, it's rather flexible as to what you do during your free thought or your skeptical sidebar or your member story. So if you got something you'd like to speak about, come let us know. The Arkansas Society of Freethinkers is a diverse organization with members who represent a wide range of opinions. We invite speakers who think will be interesting and make us think. There's no two ways about it. Our speaker today is a troublemaker. In the vein of John Lewis, she likes to get into trouble. Gail Choat is PhD, is a political scientist, educator, and civic troublemaker based in Little Rock, Arkansas. She founded Arkansas Civic Action Network to help everyday people build confidence to navigate democracy, from the voting booth to the State House. She taught at Broward College, Florida Atlantic University, and the University of Arkansas, Grantham, and now brings here a unique view of theory and praxis to Hendrix College's bold civic action initiative. With a PhD in comparative studies and years in the grassroots trenches, she brings political theory to life with clarity, humor, and fierce respect for the community she serves. When it's time, nope, we got to skip that. But this had to do with passing the microphone. I now present to you Gail Choat.
Thank you, Bern. I'm going to stand down here if that's okay. Hi. How's everybody? So far, so good? When I was asked to speak to your group, I was told you could talk about anything that you want to talk about. So I decided that I'm kind of tired of people just talking at me, and you might feel the same. So I'm hoping what we can do instead is have a little conversation about what's happening right now in our society. My background, just by way of kind of telling you how I look at things, is that I went back to school at an older age, right? I haven't been studying politics since I was 19 years old, Well, I've been living politics since I was 19 years old or before that. But my degree, my theory, my interest in it as a formal subject came to me later in life. And it came to me because I raised 4 kids. And as I was raising them, I began to see that our system of education, our system of embracing children as they're moving through the stages of their life, didn't really include the tools that they were going to need to create the world they wanted to live in. It was very much think this way, do this, act in this manner, and things will be okay as someone else sees it. But I really wanted to be a part of creating change that kids could initiate. So I went back to school because I wanted to teach kids that change is possible. I wanted them to understand that the theories of them making the world that they wanted to live in were very possible and very necessary. So as was mentioned in the intro, I spent a lot of time in Florida. By birth, I was born in Michigan, but I was raised in Wisconsin. So I always have to say, go Pack, go, because I'm from Green Bay. Lived there for most of my life, but then had the opportunity to move to Florida. And when I went back to school to get my PhD, I had to decide what it was that I wanted to study. I was very interested in political science. My master's degree is in political science, comparative politics. And it's that because I have found, for me, that when I understand structure, I can figure out how to mess with it. If I understand the conditions that I'm living in, I can see how I need to adapt it and change it in order to make things different. But when I don't understand that, I kind of flounder. It's like when somebody says to me, what do you want to eat today? I don't know. You know, I like almost anything. I've never met a menu I couldn't select something off of. So it's hard for me to make that choice. But when I go, for example, to Whole Foods to buy yogurt, have any of you been to Whole Foods to buy yogurt? How many brands of yogurt do they have?
Well, I don't know about yogurt. I've been to Whole Foods.
Okay. Have you ever bought yogurt there?
There's a bunch.
Right, there is a bunch. There's like shelves and there's cases and there's so many choices. I have found, for me, it's overwhelming. There's too many choices to make. So I'm much better off going to Aldi's where they only sell one kind, right? And it makes my shopping really simple, right? Because this structure that we live in creates a lot of choices and a lot of stress and a lot of dilemma for us. So when I look at political science, I like it because it gives me a structure that I can work within. When I teach American government, I can say this Constitution, right, is the foundation for our government. And if I read the Constitution, the very first words are, "We the people." That says something about how the structure is supposed to work. It then goes on and it lays out the articles, right? The first article within it, it talks about the role of Congress. And the fact that it's first means that that's the most important, right? And it tells us about the House of Representatives being elected by the people and being the representative. That tells us something about it. Then you have the Senate, which at the time the Constitution was written, was elected by the states. They weren't ever intended to represent us, right? They were intended to represent states' rights and the states' inability to give up power to the federal government. And then you have the presidency, and it goes on to explain exactly what that is, right? So when we look at the structure, we should be able to predict how things are going to work. How's that working out for us? How's that working out for us? When I taught American government in 2008, it was so predictable. I wrote my syllabus. I taught the same class for years because it pretty much operated like it was supposed to operate. And then in 2016, things changed, right? And every day when I wanted to walk into the classroom, I had to read at least 5 newspapers to figure out what had happened the day before, and whether or not it could happen, right? What were the rules? The rules are changing. And one of the things that we're finding right now is that people didn't understand how it was supposed to work. And if you don't understand how it's supposed to work, how do you know that someone's messing with it, right? You don't. So we founded Arkansas Civic Action Network to help everyday Arkansans see how the system is supposed to work. So we can identify the pieces that are broke, we can react in a way that makes sense, and we can hopefully then find a way to work together. Now, my PhD, as I mentioned, when I was trying to figure out what I was going to study, and my PhD is from Florida Atlantic University, I wanted to understand how we could get people elected to office who didn't look like every single person who had ever been elected to office. Okay. I wanted to know how a woman could become the president of the United States. I wanted to know how African Americans, Latin Americans, gay Americans, all Americans, right, could end up in positions of power. So I decided that that was what I wanted to study, and at that particular point in time, it was 2022, and there was a gubernatorial race happening. And I came to Arkansas as part of a 4-state look at governors' races where candidates were on the ballot who didn't look like every other candidate or governor who had ever been elected. So Georgia was one. We had Brian Kemp, right, white Christian man, running against Stacey Abrams, African American, right, woman, very different. Here in Arkansas, we had Chris Jones, right, African American man, running against Sarah Huckabee Sanders, a woman, right, who didn't necessarily look like everyone who had gone before. In Georgia and in Florida, we had the same thing. In Florida, we had Charlie Crist, who actually had been governor before, running against a woman whose name was Nikki Fried, okay? A Jewish woman, right, had never been elected before. So I wanted to know, how could they possibly win an election? And what I discovered is that the only way they could do it was to go back to those first 3 words of the Constitution: we the people. It takes grassroots organizing. It takes everyday folks, right, to really support and feel attached to a candidate in order for those changes to happen. So what was interesting to me then is, could Arkansas make change? So I traveled around the state in 2022, went to so many different fundraisers and public speaking things and grassroots kitchen table conversations. And what I began to hear from everyday folks was, I didn't know you were liberal. I didn't know you thought different. I didn't know that you weren't supportive of things exactly as they are. Why did that happen? Because suddenly people began to see the context in which we were operating and could then look at their place within it. So for each of us, we have to understand that. One of the things that I'm very passionate about right now is that we have moved into a point in our society, our culture, that has become more partisan than perhaps any time in history. Right? We have people who will not talk to each other. We have families, right, who didn't get together to the holidays because people had different political ideologies, and that became prevalent. It became the most important thing in that relationship, and they chose to not see each other, right, simply because of that. That's alarming, right? That's alarming because that continues to then degrade our entire society and the culture that we live in. Here in Arkansas, there was a study that was done by the Rockefeller Foundation and the Clinton School of Public Service. And what they discovered was that Arkansans' #1 pride, right, the thing that they felt the most proud of in this survey was their sense of community. And the fact that they felt that within their local cities, communities, neighborhoods, et cetera, that they felt a pride in that, and the fact that neighbors help neighbors. But our system right, that's operating today of hyperpartisanship is splitting that apart. So the question becomes, how do we bring that back together? How do we make those changes? I posted something that I'd love to ask you all about, because you're all thinkers, right? So I'd really like your comment on this. I posted shortly after the most recent interaction between ICE and Minnesotans, right, which resulted in the death of Nicole Good. I posted that I don't think we should be surprised that that happened. The conditions are ripe for it. We've created a system, for an example, where ICE agents are not hired for their compassion. They're not hired because these are standing members of a community. They're not hired because they feel passionate about people within the community, right? They're hired because of their ability to carry out a very specific duty. So when one reacts violently, the conditions are ripe for that. We give them guns, we give them no training, we put them in masks, and then we're surprised when they're violent? None of us should really be surprised by that. Should we be surprised that Nicole felt threatened or felt that she had to stand up for her community, that she had to be there intervening? Not really, right? Because we've created the conditions where many of us are fearful or critical of the state right now. So when the conditions are such, the individual becomes inconsequential to the conversation. It's no longer about individual choice. It becomes about group thinking, right? And in order for us to change that then, we have to change the conditions. What do you think? What do you think? Does it surprise you that these things are happening right now? No. Tell me more. What are you thinking?
For me, it mostly feels hopeless because when I try to talk to people in my community, and I've been thinking a lot about this idea of like tolerance.
Okay.
What beliefs that I'm okay, that my friends need to be at, what beliefs am I just not tolerant of because I find them too offensive, and where it's that dividing line. So stuff like this, it's I can see both sides, and I understand. It's like ICE is doing a job, but they're doing a thuggish job, and the conditions are right. It's being made on purpose to create these crises for news cycles, and people are dying from it. And we should all be offended and scared because of it. But instead, I see some members of my community kind of cheered on, where they no longer want to feel like there's a price to pay for doing things, and so they just want to celebrate it rather than say, hey, that's bad and evil. So it scares me and it feels hopeless because when I have conversations with people, we're not having a conversation over anything where we recognize the shape of things. Our words don't even mean the same things. And so if I try and explain something, the words I use mean something different to them, and it's really hard to come together and say this is what we both agree to. Because I grew up with this idea that government is like a level playing field. It's like, this is the structure, this is the game we're playing, these are the rules. And now it's like those rules are being ripped open. We no longer believe that these are the rules we play by, it's just power is power. And that's how you get things done. And I see the appeal of it, but I also see the violence of it, the depth of it. Without that stability of these are the rules, these are the frameworks that we both agree to, we can't play a game together. We can't say, oh, my opinion didn't win this time, so I just need to convince my peers of my opinion more, and then we can get our way. Instead, it's, I didn't get my way, so I'm going to get my way. I'm going to take whatever means possible.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. What do you think?
I think that someone is taking a playbook from Hitler.
Okay.
This create a common enemy
Well,
Well, it scares the crap.
yeah, and certainly the othering of the use of othering, right? The creation of other is absolutely a common tactic that's used in order to gain power, right? It happened in its own. One of the things we don't ever talk about, we talk about the founding documents all the time, and the state of Arkansas is very keen right now, right, on increasing our civic education by studying the founding documents. But one of the things they don't talk about is how part of our founding revolved around the creation of others, right? And our other was the native indigenous population, right? There was a concentrated, documented effort on behalf of early members of our Congress and our leaders of creating an identity of savage, brutal, negative, right? Uneducated, uncouth, unmannered, ungodly, right? But compared to us. And why was that done? Because at the end of the Revolutionary War, we couldn't take the chance that there were still Tories around, right? We had to create a common American identity. And it was done as part of that othering. So you're absolutely right. The othering is a tactic, and it's an approach that is often taken, and it's being taken today. I would agree with you. What do we do about that? What do we do about that?
Vote.
Vote,
Get others to, I mean, this last election, what percentage of the population actually got out and voted?
Less than 50? Less than 50% of registered voters. And not everyone is registered to vote. So when politicians tell you that they have a mandate, it's like such a small, little percentage of people. So no, you're absolutely right. Voting is part of it. Even before voting.
Education. I mean,
Who just said that? Education. Tell me more. What do you mean?
like reading the information, finding out. I mean, voting's one thing, but voting blindly, knowing, and I mean, there is no perfect candidate, but at least knowing why you're voting.
Okay. So
You know,
getting education, absolutely. Finding out what it is they stand for. What is it that they believe? Because a lot of times, right, what we see happening, we get incensed after the election that people are doing things that we didn't want, but they said they were going to do them the whole time they were running, right? If we just would have listened or looked. Absolutely. Let's go back to, what is your name, please? John. Let's go back to John's statement and tie it together with what we want to say. Because John's talking about how even before
voting is still this idea of power, right? It's just a situation of who has power.
And who's going to exercise that power. John was talking about something very different, I think, right?
Yeah, so my thing is, if I vote, this is how I was raised, because my dad had a job where if he was openly political, he would probably be fired.
Okay.
He was like working for the arts, having an arts organization, and you have to get a lot of rich donors in.
Okay.
So you don't want to make a statement on anything. And that kind of came through for me. And my wife was raised in a family where she would be berated if she said anything that wasn't Republican at all. To the point where she just kept quiet, because nobody wants that from a home environment, and I get that. I'm noticing, though, that if I just vote, especially in Arkansas, if all I do is vote, that's not enough.
Yeah.
Because it's almost guaranteed, like Chris Jones didn't get nearly as much vote as I thought he could have.
I'll never forget, the night of that election, I just have to interject, but I was just talking to a friend of mine about this yesterday. The night of the election, I was a poll watcher, meaning that I was at one of the polling places, making sure that whoever was in line at the end of the day would still be able to vote and making sure that things were handled appropriately. And when that poll closed at, like, say, 7:30, I think it was 7:30 at night, I got into my car. At 7:31, they called the race.
Yeah,
I'm like,
yeah. And so if I vote, if that's all I do, I have one vote out of everyone who voted in Arkansas, and that's not nearly enough to make any kind of change. So I have to do more than that. I have to talk with my peers and get them to vote. I have to educate them. When we're talking about local news is rough. It's like there's a ton on national news. Trying to get high quality local news, especially on the level of like a school board, there's there's just not a lot of money going into them. And even then, I can't like compare and really get at what's going on.
And let me ask you if we could take it back even further than that, because I think you're absolutely right. Because what you're saying is that instead of like, one of the problems we have right now is that we're so focused, our media attention is all focused at the national level, right? That's mostly what we hear about is what's happening nationally. We're not necessarily hearing about what's happening locally. And here in Arkansas, we have media deserts. Like there are vast portions of the state that don't get any media at all, right? And the day of the community newspaper is gone, right? So, I mean, gosh, the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, right, is behind a firewall, a paywall, right, that costs, I think it's $38 a month to subscribe to the newspaper just for the online version. And not everybody has that, right? So there's other things we have to do. And I want to go back to what you said earlier about us not even speaking the same language. Yeah. Right? Not even speaking the same language. Words don't mean the same thing. Now, if I love to travel, and I remember the very first time I ever went to Europe, right? And this was back in the late 70s, so it was like before, certainly I didn't have Google Translate on my phone, right? And I knew very, very little, but I remember the very first time I went, the first thing I had to do, if I was going to live that experience in the most positive way, I had to find a way to communicate, right? I had to find a way to make what I needed known. Now, did I do that? Sometimes they always say the best way to communicate in a foreign country is just talk louder, right? Just keep saying the same thing over and over and just louder, and eventually they'll understand. No, I had to learn enough of a local language, of German or Polish or Italian or wherever I happen to be. I had to learn enough of the local language that I could start a conversation. And then maybe I could fill it in with English, because then they might have enough of that we could kindly figure something out. I remember one time I was in Paris, and I was at a laundromat, and this young man walked in, and I don't speak any French, and he walked in and he was trying to figure out how in the world to use this wash machine, and all the instructions were in French. And he was super frustrated, and I could tell he was real frustrated. So I walked over to him and I said, could I help you? And he said, I don't speak English. And I was like, ugh. And he spoke Portuguese, and I don't speak Portuguese, and we're in France, and everything is in French. But we finally discovered that we both spoke enough little Spanish that we could have a conversation, right? Finding the words that allowed us to not be perfect, but to at least have an idea what the other one was saying, thinking, allowed us to solve a problem together. And I would say that one of the things that I love that you touched on, John, is that we have to start creating this common language, right? Through education, through community, right?
I will say, because my son's school, they did their like gay book ban. So I had to talk to the school board to try and reverse it, and they're finally doing stuff. But when I talked to them about it, I found I had to not say LGBTQIA+, or use any of the coded words I would use with my gay friends. I just say gay, or I say queer. And that resonates a lot better, because with the school board members, what I found is it was like one well-placed homophobe who had an agenda. Almost everybody involved in the decision was apathetic. They thought that was the easiest thing to do. And so trying to find the right language to where you're not signed off as a liberal freak.
Right.
Where, oh, you're just a concerned parent talking my words, my language. It was tricky.
It is tricky, right? And it takes some practice. And it takes a willingness to say, my words might not be what you hear. What I say, the way I say it, may not be entering into your world, right, in the same way. So let me see if I can find another way. Another good example is I was in Washington. I have a nephew, nephew by marriage. He married my niece, and he is in the Coast Guard. He's enlisted in the Coast Guard when he was 19 years old. Now he is a lieutenant and has been in for a long period of time. He was raised in a small, cloistered Mormon community in the state of Washington, and so we don't speak the same language, right? We have entirely different ways of looking at things. And I was there visiting, and he was like, "I am so incensed that liberals refuse to acknowledge that everyone should have a voter ID. I think that's ridiculous. How could anybody be against showing an identification when they vote?" I said, "Why does that bother you?" He said, "Well, because I think, I want to make sure there's no fraud." I said, "Okay. And you think IDs is the way to ensure that?" "Yes, I think that's what we should do." I said, "Okay. Did you ever stop and think about why people don't want IDs? Why people are against that?" And he said, "Oh, it's just because they're just liberal. They're just liberals, right? And they just don't want it, just because." I said, "Well, maybe that's not the case. Could it be anything else?" He said, "Well, I don't know why anybody wouldn't have, why would somebody not have an ID?" I said, "I don't know, let's look at that. Why would somebody not have an ID?" "They're just too lazy." "Really? They're too lazy to get an ID. Why would they be lazy?" "I don't know, maybe they've got other stuff going on." I said, "That could be." I said, "Do you think that everyone has," I said, "Where did you go and get your ID, Garen?" "Oh, the motor vehicle department." I said, "What hours are they open?" "From 9 to 5. I said, "Did you take off work to go?" "Yes." "So you were able to do that?" He's like, "Yeah, because the Coast Guard thinks that's an important thing. So yeah, they gave me time off." I said, "Okay. Do you think everyone has that option?" "I never thought about it." I said, "Did you ever think about where motor vehicle departments are located?" "Oh, they're not everywhere, are they?" "No." "And what if you have to take a bus to get there? Could you get there by 5? He's like, "Wait a minute. Are you saying that maybe part of the problem with voter ID is that not everybody has access to getting an ID?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "So let me ask you this. If I was willing to say that everybody has to show an ID when they go to vote, that would be okay and I would support that, could you support putting ID issuance in every neighborhood or within a 5-block radius or every half a mile?" He's like, "I think I could." I said, "See? We're not in different places, right?" Go.
What's your, I mean,
The right wing is extremely talented at making up things and getting mad about them. And, this idea of voter fraud is ridiculous. I mean, I know a right-wing guy that posts on Facebook talking about all the communists in government. Well, there are actually probably somewhere between 0 and 1 communist in the entire government in the United States now. 1 out of every 50,000 people may think they're communists, and half of those really aren't. They're just trying to hack people off. Bernie Sanders isn't a socialist. Come on. Bernie Sanders is he's a very liberal capitalist, but he doesn't believe that the workers should own the means of production and all of that. I mean, he's not a socialist. I'm sorry. He's just not. And so we have the problem is that they do make up a lot of stuff and get mad about it. And one of the things is the people that don't have IDs. I suspect we're not talking about a big segment of the population anymore. There was a time when we were. But, and it is a giant pain in the neck to get an ID. I remember when I had to get my real ID in Arkansas. Okay, we need your birth certificate and your social security card. No, a real one. And we need your utility bill. And we need, whatever, nonsense. I think there were like 3 categories of things. And, of course it's absurd. And I happen to be able to acquire those because my wife is very good at keeping records. But, otherwise I would have had to go to Social Security, so I needed a new card. I would have had to go to the Human Resources Records. I can't remember the name of that. But anyway, I'd buy a record and go get my birth certificate. And half of our utilities are auto billed electronically. We don't even have a utility bill anymore.
So, you know, it just seems to me quite often that the problem is that, and they've got their buzzwords. I mean, my best example is getting in an argument with one of these guys. And, you know, I was opposed and remain opposed to the Ten Commandments monument out there at the state capitol. And so he ends up calling me, among other things from taking from the list, you know, virtue signaling. And I said, let me get this straight. By opposing the Ten Commandments, I'm virtue signaling. If that's the case, I'll own up to it. You know, but you know, it is to me amazing, you know, how often. But we do have to talk to them. This is the unfortunate thing.
Because they would say those exact same things.
About us, right? They would say the same things. That there are buzzwords, that we're always ready for a fight. Like, it's the same conversation. When I talk to conservatives, it's the same thing. Chris, did you have something?
Yeah, I was just going to share that, like, one of the biggest aha books that I've ever read was Robert Putnam's Bowling Alone. It came out in like 1998, so it's ancient history. Nobody's reading it anymore. But, you know, as someone who, I've always felt like things were unraveling. My whole life seems like that way. It's like, you know, how can things keep continuing the way I see them working? And I had this feeling like things are going on inertia, and I didn't understand. And so the aha moment from Bowling Alone is that people used to live in a much different way than we live today. They used to be involved in all sorts of, you know, clubs, and, you know, you go to church, and then you'd have, you know, PTA, and you'd take your kid to Scouts, and your whole life was like bouncing between lots of organizations. And then your information space, you had, you know, actual, you know, multiple media sources that were all independent and competing on the basis of quality for the most part. And the tabloids were over here, but the tabloids is a joke that we would joke about. And now everything is sort of backwards that way. Putnam back in '98 was documenting how over the course of a century and a half, people's involvement in things, in groups with other people, was just going down. And he had noted at that time, he was talking about television, and the internet was still new. He had noted that television, you know, started going up at about the time all these civic organizations, you know, Rotarians, the Optimist Club, you had, you know, all these clubs that people were, you know, all these clubs started just hemorrhaging members. And at some point he even tracked it down to, like, you know, you had one TV channel in this community, you had this many clubs that were active with this many members. They added 2 more channels, and then it declined by this much more. And that was back in the TV era, back before we had smartphones. And my smartphone this morning told me that I've spent 2 hours a day looking at it. And to me, the aha moment is that's where my 2 hours is going now, instead of to Rotary Club or Optimists or Scouts or, you know, some other organization or political participation in a group. And you talk about, you know, what's my one vote count when the people I favor are losing by hundreds of thousands. Well, when people were in groups, they would say, we are going to vote this way. And to some extent, they still are in terms of evangelical churches and right-wing churches that are sort of the last organizations standing in our society anymore. Reading Putnam really taught me that things used to be much, much different in a way that we've forgotten. It's like it illustrated what's no longer here that you can't see anymore. And so I recommend the book to anybody who wants to see how things used to work.
It's an absolute. His theory of social connection is still followed to this day, right? He's still considered to have set the standard on that. And one of the other things that scholars have pointed out, based upon Putnam's work, is that losing those civic engagement points, right, like the clubs and the churches in that way, also lost our training grounds for these conversations, right? People are no longer trained on how to volunteer. They're not trained on how to be involved. They're not trained how to organize, right, or to come together under any kind of a common cause or common approach, or there's less likely to, maybe, because a lot of that was done in those same kind of groups. So you couple that, right, that decline of social engagement with the lack of civic education or any way of learning how we can have collective power, right? We banned the unions in many states. Union formation was another great way that people came together and realized political power and social capital. We got rid of things like the Rotarians and I mean, they still exist, but not in the same way that they used to, right? Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, all of those kinds of things. We took away those social connections. At the same time, we took away civic education, right? And suddenly now we're wondering why people can't figure out who to vote for, right? So it comes back to all of that. So like one of the things that we present as a place to start is that education, right? How do we get the word out about how things are supposed to work so that we can see what's not working and then maybe figure out how to fix it? So like my organization, one of the things that we're doing next week is we're doing a series of, this is a workshop that we're doing on January 29th. This one happens to be being held down in the Soma area, but it's called It's All Local, and it's about primary elections. Because one of the things that we found is that when we talk about this upcoming election in March, people think that unless there is a primary challenger, meaning if they're a Republican, there's 2 Republicans on the ticket, or if they're a Democrat, there's 2 Democrats on the ticket. If there's no primary, well, then there's no reason to vote. But the reality is the March election will elect our judges, our school board members, quorum court, right, as well as select who's going to run in the general election in November. But many races will be decided. Talk about a lack of participation, right? If 50% of eligible Arkansans are registered to vote and only 50% of them vote in a presidential election, now we're at 25% of the population. And in the March of the spring election, it will be probably less than 10% who will vote. You have like, certainly not a mandate, right? Less than a handful of people that are deciding who's going to determine what our schools look like, what curriculums are being taught, how funding works, right? So it's really, really important. So educational opportunities are part of it. I think the other thing is that this particular election, the one in March, I urge you to really think about, because most of those races are also what we would call nonpartisan races, right? And the nonpartisan races create an opportunity to have a different conversation, because now it's no longer about there just simply being a D behind somebody's name or an R behind someone's name. Now there has to be a little bit more conversation, as you were saying, about what it is they stand for. What is it that they represent, what their votes are, right, and how they might vote in the future. So I would say that we have a really strong opportunity right now to pay attention. Plus, what affects us every single day is a lot more determined by who's sitting on our city council, who's sitting in the school board positions, who's on our quorum court, than who we elect to be our next senator. I mean, I'd like to think that we have that power, but the odds are, right, the day-to-day stuff. Like, for an example, one of the things that I got when you were talking, Chris, in your presentation, I was thinking a lot about that data center, right, that's being billed as creating thousands of jobs, right? And you talked about the power usage and how much usage, right, that inflates. You all know that last year in 2025, the Arkansas legislature passed legislation that allows our utility companies to charge us in advance for infrastructure development, right? That means that any additional infrastructure they have to do to increase the grid, to make that data center be able to power those myriad of computers that they have, we're going to pay for today, right? They have the right to pass that on to us in increased cost today, right, for future development. And I would also tell you that there's not going to be jobs that are created by that data center. There will be some short-term jobs because of construction. But once a data center is up and running, and I'm sure you saw this in the research you were doing, the jobs that are created are low level, they're janitorial, they're security jobs, that sort of thing. They're not high-end, income-producing things that are going to impact our local communities, right? So we have to know that was a local decision, right? That decision was made by the City of Little Rock Board of Directors first. the state as well, right? People we're much closer to. So I would say that the point I wanted to make today, and I've gone longer than I was supposed to, and I apologize for that, but is that we want to take things as local as possible, right? Take it down to the local level, because it's a lot harder to have those arguments when it's our neighbor, right? The person we live with. And by having those conversations, understanding how the system is supposed to work, we can see the ways that we can react inside of it. So I study grassroots organizations, and I'm going to tell you, in June of 2024, I left Florida and I moved to Arkansas because I believe Arkansas is a model of change for our entire country. I think that we have the heart here, we have the resources, and we have the people here to actually bring back community into the political conversation. And so I'm here because I'm all in on that. So I'd be happy to hang around and talk to any of you afterwards. I just want to thank you. I don't know who actually invited me anymore. I know Jim was probably instrumental in that, and thank you, Bern, for the great introduction. And if I can answer any questions or any comments you want to make, I'd be happy to do that, but just thank you for letting me talk and share my experiences with you. If you're interested in this event, I brought some flyers for you, and I'm more than happy to share. Our website is arkaction.net, and we have a list of classes, workshops that are available, as well as resources that can be used to help you in making your voting decisions. So thank you.
Told you, troublemaker. Hope you've enjoyed today's meeting. You can see our full schedule on meetup.com, but tomorrow night is Pint Night. That's one of the most holy events of the calendar. You're invited to come down to the Flying Saucer in the River Market District and have a pint and some of their food. I get tired of having the same old food on and on and on, but there, it's the same old food on and on and on, but I've always found something to eat.
What time would it be, Brian?
That would be at 7 o'clock. That time has changed periodically. When I first started going, it started at 8, and I think I moved it to 6:30 because I was doing a hike down there that finished at 6:30, and now we're at 7. First Tuesday is always the first Tuesday of the month. Holidays not accepted. It's first Tuesday of the month. It's an American Pie Pizza in North Little Rock in the same shopping center as Kroger, because there's 2 listed on the internet as being in North Little Rock. This is the one on McCain and North Hills.
What time would that one be?
That would be at 5:30. Second Sunday Cantina Communion is always the second Sunday of each month. See, we don't expect you to be remember all that much. We put it in the name usually, what we're doing. And it happens at Cantina Cinco de Mayo on Highway 5, just south of the border. And what time would that be, Jim?
That would be 6 o'clock.
6 o'clock. The Arkansas Society of Free Thinkers needs volunteers. We need people to help with the graphic design and website, to write letters to stop church-state violations, and to host events like potlucks, family and child-centered activities. If you have skills or ideas to contribute to our cause, contact us at info@arfreethinkers.org. Get involved and come to some of our events. Our calendar is on, as I said, on meetup.com. On the table outside, you will find the Celestial Teapot, where you can feel free to leave a donation. But before you leave, introduce yourself to some new people and make plans to come back. We thank you for coming and hope to see you here again next month. Thank you.